You're listening to Street Life, a podcast about street photography with John ST and Mark Davidson.
You're listening to Street Life. I'm Mark Davidson, a street photographer from Melbourne, Australia. And with me, as always, Sydney's finest purveyor of fine photographs, my mate, Mr. John ST. How you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Mark. How are you?
Very good. Very good. I was out and about yesterday doing the Invasion Day, Australia Day marches, which massive turnout. It was about tens of thousands of people.
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands of people in the city, yeah. It was a long day for me, though. I was up at 2 and still photographing at 3 in the afternoon. I hadn't eaten. Whew, I was a zombie. I was about ready to fall over, but it was good. It was a nice day. Everyone, all the Melbourne street photographers were out yesterday, so it's good to catch up with everyone.
Just for our listeners from around the world, Mark, who may not understand what your term was, Invasion Day, you actually mean Australia Day.
Yes. No, well, we're probably one of the only countries in the world who fight feverishly over our national public holiday. We all disagree every year about changing the day, but to a lot in the community, it's not a day for celebration, is it, John? So it marks the start of the colony in Australia, and a lot of our Indigenous populations obviously aren't happy with that. So each year, the marches are getting bigger. So I think the day will change eventually, but right now, people are obviously rightly upset.
Yeah, and they're marching and they're protesting on the public holiday. That's for Australia Day, aren't they?
Oh yeah, they should be at work.
They should be at work, yeah, technically. If they really got an issue, they should do it the week after or something, really, shouldn't they?
Yeah.
Or a few days later.
That's true.
On the weekend or something, you know? You know?
Yeah. No.
Just saying.
That's true.
If you really feel that strongly about it. But anyway, I don't really care. I don't get into all that bollocks.
Yeah. Well,
if they change a day, they change a day. If they don't, they don't. It doesn't
exactly.
really bother me.
You can have a
as long as I get a holiday, I don't mind.
Exactly right. You can sort of drink beer and have a barbie on any day of the year, really. But
you can. You can. Exactly. That's our national pastime.
Exactly.
So, Mark, did you get any good photos?
Don't know. I was shooting on film.
Oh. There you go. You won't know for months.
Yeah, no.
Won't know for months. He's got to save up to get them developed next.
And I couldn't drop them off at the lab because it was closed for public holiday. So,
public holiday.
Yeah, there you go.
Public holiday. Probably at the march, Mark.
They probably were. But speaking of being angry, you I saw you had a bit of another run-in with a security guard on the streets of Sydney recently.
Which one?
Well, exactly right. It happens all the time.
Which one? I love security guards. They're my favourite.
You need an ongoing series, John v. Security.
I do. Maybe I could do a project on it. Angry security guards.
What happened? You were photographing like a wall or a barrier or something and you got told off? What happened?
Yeah, I was photographing a barrier that had fallen down and the security come charging over and give me a bit of hassle about it, saying that it was their public property and I wasn't allowed to photograph it.
And it was on the street?
Thanks,
yeah.
Suncorp. Eh?
On the street, yeah? Not...
Yeah, I was on a public place,
right.
Standing on the public sidewalk, photographing the fallen down barrier. And they basically said I wasn't allowed to photograph it because it belonged to Suncorp.
Sounds like an interesting photograph, though.
It's a stunner.
Anyway,
I'm going to sell tens of thousands of copies of that.
What was his issue?
I was breaking the law and I was trespassing when I wasn't. I told him he was talking. Initially, he come over and he was shouting at me, like, well, not shouting, raised voice.
Mm.
What are you doing? What are you photographing? Blah, blah, blah. So I ignored him at first. And then he come over and he said, Oi, talking to you. Answer my questions, like, you know. So I said, I'm photographing this. Why? Because it's in nice light.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be photographing that. It belongs to Suncorp. And I just said, mate, I'm allowed to photograph whatever I want, as long as I'm on public property.
Oh.
And then he proceeded to tell me that, public space. And then he proceeded to tell me that they owned that too. I said, I'm sorry, mate, but corporations, as much as you think you do, don't own everything just yet. So, and I said, if you've got time to come and talk to me about photographing a barrier, I suggest you go and speak to your manager and get something more important to do, because obviously you're a bit... Yeah.
Whack.
He went a bit quiet. And then he went, right, okay. So I said, can I go back to photographing this barrier? And he said, yeah.
Meanwhile, something
I
actually
do.
interesting was happening behind you. But no, you attract trouble
Yeah.
on the street, John, don't you? It's
I do. I've just got big T written on my t-shirt. T for trouble, Mark.
dearie me.
T for trouble.
You're not a
I
shrinking
don't,
violet, are you? So
no, I don't. I don't let them in. Just trying to antagonize you. They just try to stop you from doing stuff that you. It doesn't, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. I just don't back away from it. I think they expect you to go running away, scurry back into the boxes you came from. But yeah, it was fine. I had no problems. I had a great day that day. Met some nice people on the street again. Had a nice coffee with some friends. Got some photos of barriers. Yeah.
well,
Happy days, mate.
can I make one request?
What's that?
Don't get angry with our guest today, please, John, because he's on the line now.
No, he's a New Yorker.
Yeah, I know.
He's going to give me some shit back.
He'll fight back. So, you know
My
what?
money's on him.
All right, you know
Right.
what to do, John.
Today we're joined by Reuben Radding. He's a New York-based street photographer known for his work capturing the people on the streets of New York City. His photography is characterized by focus on human character and emotion. Reuben describes his work as an improvisation. You put these words in, Mark.
Improvisation. Yeah, go on.
Improvisation shaped by his long hours wandering the streets of the city. His work has featured in numerous US and international exhibitions, and he teaches at the International Center of Photography. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Reuben to the Street Life podcast. Thanks for joining us, Reuben.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Very well, Reuben. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to speak with you. And so I guess let's start at the beginning. You've been making photographs for a number of years now. I believe before photography, you're a jazz musician, if I've got that right. And so clearly you've always been creative. So when did photography become your primary passion, if in fact it is?
I mean, it happened gradually. When I first started doing photography with any kind of seriousness, I was very close. I think it was just before I turned 40. And I think I thought it would be a nice escape from the music life, which I'd been doing so long at that point. There were a lot of aspects of it that felt kind of limiting, like it was a big life, but I knew there was a lot more of me and lot more of life outside of it. So my whole life, I've tended to make anything that I felt really interested in into a vocation, because I didn't want to have to do anything else. And so I was that's a really great thing, but the downside of that is it can really bash the fun out of things. You start to become dependent on them, or even just the obsession with them can start to exhaust you in whatever it was that made it exciting and fun in the first place. So I was a little bit wary when I first started doing photography. I didn't want to immediately bleed all the fun out of it by making it a primary activity, and I didn't want to slow down on the music thing at all at that point. It was definitely not my intention. So at first I wasn't really telling anybody what I was doing. And, it wasn't like a daily activity the way it is now. So, I mean, at first it was just kind of this one aspect of my life. But then, like, after a few years, things went up a notch for me with it, of just like trying to get more intense with it. And then, some years after that, going up another notch in seriousness. And then, little by little, the music thing just started to slow down for me and become a smaller part of my life. And the music and photography started to be a little more equal. And then at a certain point, I decided that it would be best if I didn't direct, which took dominance, and to just like let life happen. And, as a result, I haven't made any particular effort to fight the photography becoming, really my primary activity at this point. Haven't quit anything, but I'm not doing a lot of music these days.
Well, you said something really interesting there, Reuben. You said you found jazz music limiting, because I mean, someone is a bit of a novice to jazz music. Doesn't have the perception to me of being a limiting form of expression. But so, are there any similarities between jazz and street photography in your point of view?
Oh, it's so many. It's insane. And I'll caution you to maybe not limit it to jazz, because I mean, jazz was one part of what I was doing, and like the same way that I've struggled with the term street photography, I think I really struggled with the term jazz, because a lot of the stuff that I was involved in, there were plenty of people who wanted to argue that what we were doing was in fact not jazz. And then there were plenty of people who would defend it to the hilt as like, no, but this is really the essence of what jazz is all about, is a process, not an outcome, and all of that kind of thing. And the same arguments go on in street photography of like, must it be candid? Must it be this? Must it be that? All these things that people get very dogmatic about. And to those of us doing the music that I was most involved in, we just didn't think about that. We were just trying to make our music, and it had references and roots in, straight ahead jazz. It had roots in, more antiquated forms of jazz, and it had roots in rock and roll music and experimental music and ethnic musics from around the world. I mean, we were taking from all of our eclectic influences. And even the word influences is misleading, because it makes it sound like we had a little menu that we were choosing things from. That's how most people use that term, right? Yes. But for us, in our experience of self-discovery through the music, we found that, the cartoon music I grew up with as a kid had been a huge influence on how I conceived and executed music. But that wasn't something that I made a decision about, of like, oh, I'm going to draw on cartoon music. It was like that you just realize at a certain point, this stuff is in me. Yeah. And you recognize it after you hear the music you make. And you go, oh, man, I can totally hear where I'm imitating, Bugs Bunny cartoons here, or I'm imitating the feedback from Jimi Hendrix's guitar, even though I'm playing a string bass. Like this stuff is all coming through me. And for me, everything in photography that I've run up against, wherever I feel like I have a problem or something I'm trying to understand, if I just think about like what's a parallel from my music past, I can usually think of one, and it makes everything feel so much clearer to me because they're problems I've already solved. So the main similarity that I experience on a daily basis that's very core, and so it's easy to talk about, is that same word that you struggled with earlier, improvisation. Because the main activity I had in music, I was a freelance musician. I played with anyone who made the phone ring, but the thing that I would do day in, day out, if there was no job, was avant-garde improvised music. And so in that music, generally, you're getting up on stage with people that maybe you've met before, maybe you haven't. You've had no discussion about what your intention is, what you're going to play. The instrumentation of the group may be conventional, may be very strange, but whatever it is, you're going to get up and in the moment invent a music together, collectively. And I feel like every day I go out with the camera and I do the same thing, except instead of having collaborators as like fellow artists, I have the world that I'm collaborating with, and I can't predict what it's going to do. It's going to instigate sometimes, and sometimes it's going to seem to almost follow my instigation. And it's all very fluid and demands that I be very present and be very accommodating to what's going on around me. I can't, when you're playing in an ensemble and you're inventing a music, well, you can do certain moves as a musician that feel very decisive, and maybe others will feel a little bit controlled by, of like, oh, he makes a certain kind of rhythm, and others feel like, oh, I should fall in with that rhythm, but they don't have to. Sometimes they refuse to, just to be contrarian or different, or because they have a better idea than, imitation. And so similarly in the photography, like the world doesn't always conform to my wishes, and I have to then go with it. Or, it might seem to demand a certain thing of me, and I have to try to just be fluid in the moment with it. But the biggest reason that I appreciate this parallel is because, for a long time, I didn't really understand what was it about the improvised music that had such a hold on me, because sometimes the outcome of it was pretty bad. You don't have there's no guarantees. Just like with street photography, you can show up and feel like you did everything right, and it could still really fall on its face. And I started to understand over time that it was the sense of risk that was inherent in that music was, for me, really, really exciting. And I thought it was also very exciting for the audiences that appreciated it, the ones who had the right attention span and appetite. They would really groove on that too. If it felt like everyone knew what they were doing and were just like being very cooperative and making it easy, it could sound good. But what was really exciting was when you could feel that sense of danger or of risk, of that the whole thing could fall apart at any second. And that's the way I feel about the best of street photography. Is it's so on an edge of being ready to fall apart. And when I see work that's very settled and very formal and very unrisky, I feel a little bit disinterested, because I feel like there's such a promise in this kind of photography of risk. And so yeah, that's a huge parallel for me.
So do you find, Reuben, now that you've moved away from music a little bit and you've moved into photography space, that you have a certain amount of creative license because you're just doing it yourself? I know all the variables on the street are different. You can't control those, but do you still feel like you have more control over what you're creating in doing what you're doing now?
The best part isn't the control over the creation. It's the control over the process, that I don't have to wait for anybody else. I don't have to wait for the right collaborators, getting a space to practice in, transportation from with the gear from place to place. Don't have to worry about getting a gig, getting to the gig, and then waiting around for 2 hours to be able to go on stage and become alive. Yeah. Like I walk out my door with a camera. That's it. And sometimes I don't even walk out the door. Even here in the house, I might see something out the back window. It's 24/7. And that was what I always wanted and didn't realize it for most of my life. It wasn't until, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I was in graduate school, and I was writing a lot about my photography, and I had this sort of epiphany that from an early age, like maybe 10, 11 years old, I had always had this mistaken idea that the art life could and should be 24/7, and that there was no like normal time and artist time, and this was, nobody told me this. This was just my crazy assumption I made as a kid, reading about people like John Lennon or whoever. Like I saw them as these interdisciplinary artists who, like Lennon, for instance, he played in a band, he wrote songs, he acted in movies, he wrote books, he painted, he did all of this different stuff, and he was an activist, like all these different ways of being, in a creative life. And, then here I was as a musician having to constantly wait. Constantly waiting around. Now, looking back, having already had this epiphany, I can more easily see how I might have applied these same realizations to my music life and maybe made it a little more fulfilling for me. But that was always a frustration. I was a frustrated artist a lot of the time in my music life.
So just touching on that as well. So it's more about the process for you than actually creating a photo, because that's how I look at it too. I don't go out looking to create a photo. I just go out because I want to go out and capture whatever I see. I don't have a set purpose. Is that what it means to you? And why does it mean that to you? We're all told that we need to go out and capture a story. And I've read that, and I've heard you say that you don't like to use that term. And why is that? Because that used to freak the shit out of me when I first started. Like, how the hell am I going to, find a story? Like, I just want to capture things.
Oh, yes. Well, that's another word I avoid: story. Yeah. So to deal with your first question first, to me, the going out in search of a picture or going somewhere hoping to find a picture is important. It is a big part of the impetus that drives me to do it at all. But then the actual benefit and the payoff has very little to do with those pictures. So it's sort of both for me. Like I can't really I can't really let go of the appetite for the next picture that'll make me feel like I'm worth something. But once I'm out there doing it, I mean, there isn't really a lot of benefit in retaining that thinking. You just got to be chasing whatever you can chase that feels like useful material. And that's the way I prefer to see it. Instead of trying to capture what I see, I'm more interested in seeing how I can use the things I'm seeing as material to do something that'll feel fresh and musical to me. And, you know, I'm super, super inspired by Gary Winogrand, and as much by his intellect as his actual photos. And, you know, he posed this question of you know, saying like, look, we know too much about what makes pictures look like they do. So how do you get around taking the same ones over and over, right? He poses that as a rhetorical question, but I feel like I understand what you got to do, you know. And for me, it's a combination of two things mainly. One is I need to clear my mind of all these things I think I know about what I'm seeing. I need to clear my mind of all these assumptions I have about the world, because they limit my photographs. If I'm using the camera to try to tell you how clever I am and that I know things about what's going on the street in New York City that I can explain, I'm going to make photos that look just like everybody else's. I used to do it and I still do it, but I do it and I go, that's not for me, right? Because I've seen what happens when the stuff in the world simply becomes material. And there's various ways to get there. And I don't share the point of view that some people have, that there's some importance to telling the truth of things. I don't actually think that's the highest goal for me. I think that when I was first doing this, I was a lot more sympathetic to the documentary impulse, because most of my favorite photographers were documentary photographers. And I still, at least stylistically, am extremely influenced by the great documentarians. But I have come to understand that my purpose is a little different, and that my priority is the photograph's energy and ability to say something unparaphrasable enough that you, whichever viewer is looking at it, will form their own connections.
Yeah.
And my favorite way that happens is with the presence of questions in a picture. So if a picture seems to, you know, explain a situation, here's a parent mad at their kid and they're taking their toy away, right? That's potentially a good picture. It's potentially interesting. But how much more interesting is it when you see something that you can't explain, and the viewer is in their mind going, I really want to know what was happening. I really want to know why this was occurring, and you know, what happened right after this. You know, they have these questions burning in their mind. At a certain point, I realized it's way more fun to not explain. It's way more fun if the viewer has that burning desire annoying them as they move on from your picture and into other things, you know? And so I really have learned not to explain things too much or caption things too obviously. And that word unparaphrasable that I said a minute ago, that one became a big clue for me several years ago too, that the pictures of mine that feel like they have the best chance of lasting in someone's mind are the ones where, as soon as you try to describe it in words, it kind of doesn't seem that great. Yeah.
Well, Reuben, some of your work that I just want to bring up, which relates to what you're talking about now, and an image of yours that typifies what you've just explained is the photo of a woman grabbing that skinny white kid by the wrist and dragging him along the street, which so many questions, like you, as you say, I don't know what your interpretation of that image is, but as you say, there's a million different interpretations you could have when you see that. And I think it's such a powerful image and such a striking image. And as you say, one that lingers in your mind long after you've seen it. So tell us about what went into the capturing of that moment?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a perfect example in every way, beside being one of my better photos and also being one that fits this topic that we've raised of questions and unparaphrasability. But it also really underlines some really important aspects of my practice, which is ultimately the accident. I mean, I really didn't know what was happening at the time. Like I did not have some keen understanding or awareness of what was happening that enabled that picture to happen. It was on a day that had not been a particularly good shooting day, and it was at the end of the day, and I thought I was done for the day. And I was about 2 blocks from a subway station. I was going to go get on the train and go home. And I crossed the street. I still had the camera hanging around my neck, all settings, you know, where I like them when I don't know what's going to happen. And I stepped onto that corner and felt this kind of burst of energy happen next to me. And I just sort of turned and took a shot from about belly level and turned and kept going. I didn't look back to see what they did after, and I hadn't noticed them until that moment. So when people ask me a lot of questions about the people in the picture, which they very often have, I don't have answers. I mean, a few years later, I learned a little more, but it's kind of not important because it doesn't really have anything to do with what makes the picture interesting. And the way it happened was so incidental that it's kind of a perfect humbler for me, because like everyone else, I want to feel like I'm good at this, you know, and like I have some kind of, you know, insight into what mastery is made of or something. Yeah. But the fact is, about half of my best photos happened in exactly that way, where I don't really even know what I'm seeing, and I'm just stabbing at a sense of energy or a gesture, something, you know, just hoping that it's going to be worthy. And this was when I had no assurance it was going to be anything. And a couple blocks later, as I'm about to get on the train, I looked at the back of the camera and I just went, oh, there's something here. Yeah. And then later I looked at it on the screen. I said, there's definitely something here. And then I printed it. I felt like, okay, this might be one of my better ones. And I think what's really exciting to me about that picture that one can talk about, because there's a lot of it that it's kind of very subjective, you know, for the viewer to decide for themselves. But I think what, aside from more obvious things having to do with faces and body language, I mean, it's such an in-between moment. The woman's grip on the kid's wrist is very tight, but his body is relaxed, his arm is relaxed. And so it's very clear that the forward motion of her has not really started yet, but she's in the complete physical gesture of intention to move. You know, it could not be clearer. So the forces in the picture are very clear, but they have not quite activated yet. And then the line that gets formed graphically of their arms connected and all of that, and that they're right on the corner there. It's, you know, and it's especially fun for me now, as I've been past that corner several times in the last week, and it looks completely different now. And that was only a few years ago. So it's really highlights for me the moment of that, you know, like what a missable moment that was. It was such a fine moment, made all the more fine by the photographic process. So yeah, I'm very happy about that picture.
So when you're out shooting, Reuben, how much of it is instinctual versus planned? How much of a part does optimism play in getting a good photo for you? Like you mentioned
optimism.
Yeah.
I don't think of myself as a very optimistic guy, but I really, really believe in the work. Yeah. You know, I really believe in the process enough. I believe in the days where you don't get any pictures. You know, I believe in the days where you think you're getting no pictures and then figure out later that maybe you did. I believe very much in the cumulative process of putting in the time and putting in the steps. And, you know, I trust that. It's been there have been times where like I could have a whole week where I just feel the constant presence of my brain saying, why do you even bother doing this?
Yeah.
You know, this is insane. You could be doing so many better things with your time today. You could be doing things that will make you a lot more popular with your wife today. You could be doing things that would make yourself a lot more money today, you know. But I've found that by being committed to being in a process with all of this, that's where all the best rewards have come from. You know, before say 2013, I always had, you know, some sort of job, or maybe my music life was super busy and I didn't really have the time to throw into wandering the streets or going to weird events and so on in search of pictures. And I always wanted to. I would be very annoyed that I couldn't. And now I have the time, and I feel like I just have to honor that and treat it like you would treat a full-time job.
So what tactics do you use, Reuben, to get yourself over that? Because we all go through it. We question why we're doing what we're doing. What's the purpose of it all? You know, everything I'm taking is shit. How do you get yourself through it? Because sometimes those little breaks or those little self moments of doubt last for a couple of days, a couple of hours. Sometimes they go on for weeks, months.
Yeah. Well,
you know, how do you get through that?
just pick up on what John said, because a lot of our listeners will, you know, go through periods of that themselves, thinking, I'm no fucking good at this. Like, I'm just not, you know, good at photography. So how do you push through that?
One foot in front of the other, you know, like as literally as that sounds, you know, like not this past summer, but the one before, I had a period of a couple of months where I was feeling that, just feeling like this is freaking hopeless. And I was really broke, and I was just feeling really negative about my own work, even my past work. You know, I was just in a very negative place. And what got me through partially was this feeling of complete surrender that came over me at a certain point of just like wanting to just kind of willingly throw myself into the absurdity of that, of like, oh, this might be completely hopeless. And so my response is going to be to just keep throwing myself into it face first, you know. And maybe it's partially from things that have happened in my past life, but I just sort of felt like as soon as you stop and go home, it's over. And as long as you keep out there, you know, one more day, there's the chance things might turn around. And another thing that I really got a lot of strength from was, so the MFA program that I went to was a low residency program. So I was mostly on my own, just dealing remotely with my advisors and colleagues. And so the way that program was structured, every 3 weeks, I would have to send in a batch of my work and show what I've been doing, and some writing too, to sort of explain what was going on and what I was focused on. And every 3 weeks, I would have to do this, what they call them packets at that school. And so I would be preparing a packet, and I would go into it with varying feelings about what I had done that past 3 weeks. Sometimes I'd feel like, man, I was killing it. And then other times I would feel like, man, I was really slacking. I really didn't work that hard. Or maybe I felt like I worked hard, but the results were crap. And then I would put the packet together and edit, you know, some photos, maybe 20, 25 photos. And I'd look at it and I'd go, wow, actually I did pretty okay. Like when I felt bad, I would look and see, oh, I did okay. And when I felt good, I would see that I did about the same. And even just in terms of production, I would look at, well, how many exposures did I even make in this 3 week period? And it was always really similar. Even the weeks that I felt like I slacked, I did 1,500 exposures. And then the weeks that I thought I was killing it, I did 1,500 exposures. So I realized my feelings don't really mean jack shit. You know, fuck my feelings. My feelings are not a good source of information. So if I'm walking the streets feeling like this is pointless and I'm probably untalented and should think of something else to do with myself, that's a feeling. And it's not a reliable source of information. So I just walk through the world with as much doubt and surrender as I can muster. There was a Korean Zen master, Sun Song, who used to have this mantra, only don't know, which I have really tried to take to heart. You know, when you're out there, you're trying to take pictures, you're trying to have an experience, only don't know. You're knowing and all your little wisdom and stuff is not going to save you. You know, but what could save you maybe is to release yourself from all of that need to know. You know, I didn't need to know. So when people ask about strategy or methodology or whatever, there are days where I hear about some interesting event that sounds like there might be a picture there for me, and I'll go to it. And other days I just wander. And for me, the big thing is just making sure that it doesn't feel like there's any barrier between normal time and working time. You know, from the second I walk out the door, I'm ready, and I'm ready until I come back in the door. You know, I'm just, I'll take it all.
Reuben, you correct me if I'm wrong. You pretty much shoot exclusively in black and white. Why is that? And I remember you once saying that Rebecca Norris-Webb had a bit of early advice for you on that topic as well. Yeah.
No, it's funny. I was still struggling with the whole black and white and color question when I took the workshop with her and Alex Webb, and I didn't tell them that was on my mind. But the first day of the workshop, they had us bring something like 30 little prints with us of what we'd been doing, and I think I brought like about 2/3 black and white and about 1/3 color, and spread them around on a table. And they came over and looked at them and just told me, you don't need to shoot color ever again. And, the great thing about that was that they didn't tell me not to. They didn't tell me I should do one or the other. They told me I didn't need to shoot color anymore. And it was just so well worded. That of course you could. Of course, I think they're very conscientious people who didn't want to, make a grand sweeping statement that I shouldn't shoot color, because for all they knew, I might have had better color work in me someday. But, they could see that I had a thing with black and white that I felt but didn't totally trust. And the greatest thing about being given that encouragement or permission to drop color entirely was it led directly to this epiphany about subject matter that I was alluding to earlier, that as soon as I was faced with no longer shooting color, there were all these things in the world that I wanted to take pictures of. And as soon as I faced them as a black and white photographer, I realized without the color, this thing is just pointless. It's not a picture worth taking. So I just didn't take it. Right. And previously I would take it and then be like, how am I going to mix this in with my black and white? How am I going to make this all work? Yeah. And, it's not that it can't be done. Like I remember right around this same time, I went to a great exhibition by Mark Cohen that was about 3/4 black and white. And then there was this small section of color photos in it. And it felt totally appropriate. It mixed in perfectly. Yeah, I see you've got a Mark Cohen book back there. Yeah, and it felt utterly organic the way that was mixed in that context. So I knew it could be done, but I just didn't see how I was going to do it. It felt like I was, using two different brains or something. And so anyway, when you say why black and white, first of all, it just rings a lot of bells for me. A lot of I was talking before about influences, like a lot of the things that probably make me feel really simpatico with black and white could go back to my childhood. The movies and TV that I was watching as a kid. You know, my family, we didn't have a color TV set until I was something like 12 years old. We had this black and white TV, or two of them actually, that was all I saw for years. I remember when I was a kid, they showed the movie The Wizard of Oz on TV, and it was, you know, and you read in the TV guide, it would say, this is just so revolutionary when it goes from black and white into color. When they go to Oz, it's just this incredible revelation, right? And I watched it on black and white TV for the first time, and so they go to Oz, and it just looks like Kansas to me. I don't see any difference, right? And it wasn't until, you know, a few years later, I saw it in some screening, and I was like, oh, wow, that is really different. And I thought, I kind of like the black and white Oz better, you know? Nice. But, you know, like stuff like that, I think really dug into my brain in some weird way. Or, you know, when I was a very young person getting obsessed with music, you know, we didn't have the internet. If you got a hold of a record album or a book about your favorite stuff, I mean, I would absorb it over and over and over and over, obsess on it, right? So I was staring at all of this classic black and white music photography of the jazz era, of rock and roll, later punk rock photography. And, you know, all the names of the photographers became very big in my mind. I wasn't interested in photography. I was interested in rock and roll bands, but I got to know the names of people like Jim Marshall and Anton Corbijn and it's funny, years later, I get into photography for real, and I find that there's this incredible gender divide in it, that, you know, there's so few women in the history of photography as we know it. But I was very confused by that, because a lot of my favorite music photographers were women. You know, we had Lynn Goldsmith and Laura Levine and Penny Smith and Julia Gorton. These were people who felt like they were illustrating a life I wanted to be having. You know, I would see their pictures and think, man, I want to be there. I want to be one of those people, you know, and it was all delivered to me by these women who were, you know, showing me this black and white world in photos that was where I wanted to live. So I love living in the black and white palette. I never feel the least bit tempted to take color back up again. I do it occasionally for a job, you know, if I shoot a wedding, or I did a theater performance recently, I had to deliver some work in color, and it just feels like it isn't even my work, you know.
It's interesting you mentioned Anton Corbijn there. I've got one of his books because he was the documentary photographer for Depeche Mode, who's my favorite band of all time. So fabulous photographer. But so you just spoke about the positive aspect of getting feedback about your work and a road you should be going down. Now, I can't imagine you've had much negative feedback in your life. I'm just assuming. We've talked about assumptions. But if you did, how have you dealt with that, and how do you cope with that, Reuben? Because we all get told you should do this, you should do that, you should focus more on this. I liked your old stuff better than your new stuff. All that bullshit. Do you know what I mean? How do you deal with that?
That would be a really fun one for me to hear. If somebody said, I like your old stuff better than your new stuff, that would be fun. You know, it's funny that you should mention that, because sometimes the most alienating feedback I've gotten was intended to be a compliment. Wow. You know, like I remember in 2020, particularly during the shutdown, you know, I was working really hard in that time period. I was out every day, working the longest days I'd ever done, just exhausting myself. And every day I would post some pictures from what I'd done the day before, usually about 10. And there were people I knew who were writing to me saying things like, this is the best work you've ever done, and this is so important, and all this. And I thought, what are they talking about? These pictures are incredibly boring. You know, these empty streets and nothing happening, or just like, here's a guy in a mask, big deal. You know, I knew it wasn't the strongest stuff I could do, but it mattered to somebody, right? So sometimes people will give you compliments and they make you feel strange because they seem to like alienate you from your own truth, right? And as I've had a lot more visibility in the last year and a half, I've sometimes had to face moments like that with people who, you know, they say they're fans, and I appreciate them deeply, but sometimes they say things that make you go, what? Are you looking at the same pictures I am? You know, it's very confusing sometimes, right? So it doesn't have to be negative, the feedback, to be difficult. But to try to engage with your question more directly, there have been a few times where people said things that were critical, for sure, and each case was so different. There was one that really sticks out in my mind. When I was a lot newer to this, I used to go occasionally to these like portfolio review events.
Oh yeah.
And I think primarily I wasn't really looking for feedback. I was looking for connections to, sell stuff, and, get gigs or something. But, it's a process that's there to be a process. So you go and you show people some pictures and you hear what they have to say about them. And sometimes what they say is at least interesting. It's information, it doesn't have to be, your next big epiphany. It could just be, oh, okay, so this is when I put my work in front of 4 different people, here's the 4 different responses you get. Well, there was one guy, it was like one of my very first reviews ever was with this guy who I won't say, who he was or what organization he was with, but he said, well, there's an irony about it that I'll find a way to share. But he said some things that I felt very insulted by, particularly, and he, God bless him, he tried to be nice. Like I don't think he was trying to be mean at all, but he described my pictures as vernacular, which is a very fine art, fancy pants way of saying amateur. And he took a special exception to the paper I had chosen to print my photos with. I was totally new to this. I didn't know anybody had any feelings about paper, and I had glossy prints. And he said, you really shouldn't show prints glossy like this because it really does accentuate the idea that this is just vernacular work, And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. Oh, yeah, I like these prints. I feel really happy when I look at them, But it stuck with me for years. I was haunted anytime I made a print, worrying about, was it matte enough for, people who think they're looking at art, and so it really got under my skin, even though I thought he was being a jerk. But then, to the ultimate irony is then it's like 10, 12 years later, something like that, he ends up being a jurist on a competition I was in that I didn't win, but he specifically chose one of my photos as a quote unquote juror's pick.
Right.
For that contest. So got my little, everything comes around somehow. It's nice.
What is your relationship with printing your work? Do you advise younger photographers getting into photography now to print that? Do you see that as the ultimate sort of endpoint in photography? And I know you've made a few books and zines yourself over the journey. Do you encourage people to print their work and not have it live on your hard drive or on your phone?
Yeah, I like it. Not everybody has to like the same things, I started printing with real regularity about 6 or 7 years ago, I guess. So I have a Epson printer here, and I make prints really regularly, and I've learned which papers I like, and it looks good to me. But for me, it's really nice because, screens, no matter how much you calibrate them, a backlit screen has a certain wow factor to it that you lose as soon as you put something on a piece of paper. So there's kind of no standard. And so as soon as you put something on a piece of paper, there's sort of a standard that you're working off of. And I find that helpful. It changes how I process the images. Sometimes if it's one of the pictures I feel especially strong about, I'll get it to, in the computer as close to what I think it should be as possible. And then I make a print of it. And usually I immediately see something that needs to be changed.
Yeah.
You know, some area that needs to be burned in a little, or some corner that doesn't look dense enough. And, and so I'll make those alterations. And, to me, like, that's its own process. The zines, boy, talk about accidents, it was still something that I kind of wandered into about 5 years ago. It'd be 5 years ago this summer, I guess. I was finishing grad school, and my graduate portfolio was way too big to print. It was, this like hundreds of pages with 80 photographs in it. And, it wasn't something I was going to print. So, but I wanted to have something physical. I'm not sure why. I just really felt like I wanted to have something physical to be able to show people. And so I made this zine called Off Topic, and people responded to it really well. So I did a second one. And then I didn't really think I was going to do any more after that. And then COVID happened. And like overnight, everything that I was doing for money vanished. It was like the biggest case of having the rug pulled out from under you work-wise. And so I was just thinking, well, what can I do that I just have control over? And I thought, well, I know how to make a zine at this point. And so I made a zine called Corona Diary, and that sold out like instantaneously. And I felt really encouraged by that. So I did a second one, which felt kind of bold, but people showed interest. So that one sold out pretty well too. And then I remember feeling like really sheepish a few months later. Like I was thinking about doing a third one. And, I'm the kind of person where like every time I do anything that's at all self-promotional or, sort of putting myself out there, I feel kind of sick inside. It's not my nature.
Yeah.
I don't know how generational it is, but it feels like a very Gen X kind of thing about me that I'm like, I don't want anyone to think that I think so highly of myself. Right.
I get that. Yeah.
But I asked some of my most cynical, negative friends if they thought I could get away with doing a third Corona Diary scene. They all said, "Oh yeah, you should totally do it." And I was like, "Okay, all right." So I did a third one, and at that point, it just became a really helpful part of my whole process. The same way that doing those packets in grad school had been so clarifying, of every 3 weeks finding out, oh, maybe I'm actually pretty steady with my production. Maybe I actually am doing better than my feelings tell me, or maybe my feelings of grandiosity those 3 weeks were kind of unfounded. It's this great reality check. So I started, so I just continued doing zines after that. And now I've done 14 of them.
Wow.
And
14.
And it's so gratifying to look back at these things that, very few people see them. I only make 100 copies of each one. And when they're gone, they're gone. I don't, print them again. And so, it's not like something that is proliferating out in the world in some huge way, but it really creates this sense of like milestone markers for me, and a reality check on, what a particular season has been for me. And it's also just been fun, fun to experience the work in that way, to like deal with the problems that you have to deal with to make a zine layout and sequence, and figure out what you can put on the cover where there'll still be room for some text. And, like there's all these little things you don't think about until you're making a thing. And that's been a lot of fun, and really kind of fun to play with the informality of zines, because, when you deal with photo books, there's such a feeling of permanence, and, it being a kind of a big deal, the big fancy photo book on the coffee table that's, weighs a ton, and it costs a lot of money. And, it feels like you're really making a statement, and with a zine of 36 pages, I just feel like, yeah, I mean, there's probably going to be a couple of page turns in there that I'm embarrassed by someday. And there's probably going to be some photos I look back on later and go, but it's fine with me, because it's just a zine. I try to make them good. I really do. It's not like I just stick whatever in there and send it out. Like I'm really trying to do something good, but like there just isn't the same pressure on it, and it feels very like I feel like I learned so much from doing it.
You're saying you learn so much. What do you mean by that, Reuben? What are you actually learning from producing a zine? Just digging a little bit deeper there.
One of the things, I'm thinking more about the accumulation of doing so many of them, is that over time, I start to get a clearer idea about this imagined realization of my work that I have found so elusive, because I don't think about my work the way a lot of people conventionally recommend, like thematic things, projects, things that are about something. Like I'm not very interested in aboutness. There's this as much as the best pictures are unparaphrasable, so is this idea that I've had in my brain for years now of what this is all for and what it could all look like put together in the right way, and what that could portray about me and my search for a self that's gone on through this whole process. And it's very fragile. You put a little bit of too much emphasis on one kind of subject matter or another, and it all falls apart. You put things into a certain kind of sequence and rhythm, and it can all fall apart. If you make it too formal, too stuffy, it all falls apart. Similarly, if you make it too punky and cut up and everything, this also would not feel like me, right? So it's all an exploration to try to find out, like, what things work for me, you know, like when I and also having to deal with the ways that outside influences, the rigors of printing or of you know, like the number of pages you have to do certain bindings or whatever, those kind of physical issues then also influence decisions about sequence or what to include. And so that becomes revelatory as well. You know, like very often the back covers of my zines have been this wonderful repository for pictures that I kind of like, but I know are not what some would call bangers, right? These are not the ones that are going to live in infamy, but I think they're really interesting in their own way, but maybe they're just a little quieter, a little more environmental, have a lot of space in them or something. They make great back covers, you know, where you're not going to have something juxtaposed in a spread. It's just going to be a single image, and it's going to have some text in the bottom corner with my URL and a copyright thing and whatever, right? So it's like, I don't mind mucking up this picture with those things, right? So that becomes very interesting. Like, oh, there's a place for these pictures that aren't in your top 10, right? And that's another thing that keeps coming up in doing this process is, like, you find out that there's uses for these things that you think are shit, right? Like, for instance, and this is not related to zine making, but is also very true, is, you know, in the beginning, this was way before Instagram and stuff like that. I had this account on Flickr. I would just stick stuff up on there, all of my earliest dumbass experiments with the camera and everything. And, you know, later when I got more serious, I kind of drifted away from Flickr like a lot of people, and I didn't really put stuff up there anymore. But then years later, I started, because of my background in music, I started getting approached by a lot of musicians for photos they could use for album art. And so they were especially interested in things that didn't have people in them, or certainly ones that didn't have faces in them, because, you know, you can get into some legal hot water with that without releases. So I didn't really know what to show people, but I'd be like, well, you know, if you go to this old Flickr site of mine, you see all these stupid pictures I used to take of, you know, tree bark and, you know, electric pylons and birds and, you know, food or whatever the hell I was, you know, trying to learn how to use a camera on. And I've ended up licensing a whole bunch of those photos to record labels.
Wow.
These photos that I think are, I mean, they're not important to me, but it really, really tickles me that I'm now able to, like, find a place in the world for those that makes somebody happy and makes me a few dollars. It's just, it's really exciting to me that this stuff we think is junk might actually be gold in the bank. So that's another thing that helps keep me going on those, as you were asking about, those days where you're walking around going, what the hell am I even doing? Like that picture you take that you think, that was nothing important. Like that might actually be important.
Yeah.
You know, a couple of years ago, I took a picture of my wife bowling because she does this really cute thing, kicking her leg when she rolls the ball. And it's kind of like when the cat does something cute, like I just can't even really stop myself from trying to take the picture, even though at this point I have like 8 or 9 of these same pictures of her bowling. But there we were. And I see her do the kick once and I go, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I already have that picture. And then she does it again. I'm just like, I can't help it. And I take the picture and I post it on in my Instagram story. And like 10 minutes later, somebody asked me if they could buy a print of it.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
Right. So I'm not the best judge of what is going to get me over or make me a sale or any of that. Like my very best pictures don't sell.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I've sold maybe 2 prints of that picture you brought up earlier, the woman and the kid, you know, and I've sold, you know, many, many more prints of things that to me are kind of, you know, my just okay marginal work.
Well, you know what they say, Reuben, one man's trash is another man's treasure. So
yes.
Are you calling his photos trash, John?
I'm not saying your work is trash.
I am living proof of this. No, but it's so true. It's really true. And you know, for me, like the zines, you know, the one there was 1 or 2 that sold much more slowly than the others. I didn't think they were worse, and I don't think anyone else would have thought they were worse because they don't see them before they buy them. You know, they don't see them before they decide not to buy them. You know, so what drives that? I don't know. You know, had a bad month, but
financial,
you know,
could be anything. You
like,
know what I mean?
Yeah, who knows? But you know, then the next one sold like hotcakes. So you know, who cares? Yeah, and then when you've done 14 of them, you look back and you just go, oh yeah, you know, I'm just happy I did all of them. You know,
I can semi-retire like, now. I've sold them all.
Oh yeah, I wish. No,
I just want to touch on the zines, though, Reuben. Just your opinion. Do you think it's worth for photographers to release it? I always get asked when I'm going to release a zine, and I think Mark's the same. You should release a zine. Do you think there's an importance for photographers to release a zine?
No, it's not important, but do it anyway.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. What's important, you know? Like for us to talk about any of this stuff, us to talk about any of this stuff, like it's important to either the individual's development or to putting something in the world that matters. It's kind of a joke, right? Like we're small time. When you look at the media culture and what has real influence and real possibility of being remembered the next month, let alone the next year. We are small. This medium is so ubiquitous, and yet there's not room for many famous photographers, right? Like, I'm sorry, we are a marginalia here. Now, I come out of a long history in very uncommercial music, so this is nothing new to me. You know, I'm totally used to being completely and utterly insanely devoted to something that will never make us famous or millionaires. Yeah. You know, I'm happy to be a thousandaire today, right? So important is kind of off track. For me, it's like, what is it you want to be in this life, right? I meet a lot of people who are so infected by the language and belief systems of industry. That's not what got me into wanting to be an artist when I was 10, 11 years old. I wanted to experience ecstasy. I wanted to experience what it is to transcend this copycat bullshit corporate insanity that is not what life is about to me. I'm just not interested, right? So when I'm surrounded by photographers who are trying to figure out how to be influencers, brand ambassadors, make the kind of work that'll make people come to them for things and hand them money and so on, I just feel like we're speaking different languages, and that, it's not that I don't feel the pull of that kind of stuff and understand the temptation, especially if you're feeling so thirsty and you just want to know, how can I make a buck? Yeah, we all have to live in a capitalist society, but we don't have to become the human resources of an industry in that way. Okay. So this I feel very passionate about. When I'm out there walking around feeling hopeless about my photography, I'm also reminding myself that I'm doing something very defiant by doing something hopeless. I am doing something very, very much against the corporate grain by devoting myself to something other than money and power.
Yeah.
Okay. I am making myself outrageously vulnerable out there. When people want to talk to me about ethics and photographing the vulnerable or something like that, I just laugh. I'm like, do you know how vulnerable I am out there? I haven't had a full-time job in 11 years. So tell me about vulnerability. I'm not trying to say I don't have it easier than some people I see on the street, but you know what? We're all out there together. And, nothing taught me that more than COVID. I mean, it was me, one or two other photographers, a whole bunch of homeless and pimps and cops and people who drive ambulances. I mean, that was pretty much it for a few months there. And, I don't really respond well to, anybody's judgment about this, because I've made myself like so ready to die out there. I've had long days where I walk around thinking, hey, maybe this is the day the bus hits me. And am I okay with that? Yeah, because I lived my life like a human being today, actually dealing with what's real, not thinking about how to get more clicks and how to get over. I'm just not interested in that being the focus of my life. I have to live in a capitalist society, so I sell things. I sell, I run workshops. And what's great about running workshops is not the money people pay me. It's that those are the most substantive conversations I get to have about my medium are with these people who I don't know, who come to me, sign up to spend 6 weeks with some other people they don't know, all in different locations around the country or in other countries, and try and figure out like how to make this great. I couldn't feel more rewarded than to have that experience over and over. Last year, I worked with about 70 different students between my job at ICP and the workshops that I organize. And I mean, that's so much better than any kind of job I could ever do. I just feel incredibly fortunate. But the main reason I feel fortunate, I don't have to teach photo 101. I don't have to teach photo orthodoxy class. I get to like really try to get to the meat of the matter and find out what are we about as people, as individuals,
Reuben, it's I love hearing you talk and say that. It's just it's really powerful and amazing. Yeah. And look, I'm conscious that I could listen to you for days, but we have gone over our hour mark. But I can't let you go without asking you about New York. You've been there since I think around the 80s. It's probably changed immensely over that time. And we in Australia live vicariously through Paulie B's videos of New York, and there just seems to be a shit ton of street photographers out there, all doing their work. And what's your thoughts on the New York street photography, the photography scene? I know you don't like that term. And do you think it's a good thing that there is so many people out there doing the same thing?
I don't know. I mean, I don't begrudge anyone wanting to do it. I mean, it's really cool. And some of them are making really good work, and I like to see good work. There are times where it feels like, can we really sustain this many street photographers? We've got quite a few right now. But I also have been at this a while, and I know that some of them will not continue. Some of them will continue being photographers, but move into related pursuits. Some that I've met in the last few years already have moved into more kind of like commercial work or editorial work or documentary kind of projects, and some will become really valued colleagues of mine. So ultimately, it's all good.
Yeah.
But there's moments where it gets a little bit hard to work because you want to chit chat and and I like people. I like to chit chat, so it can be a distraction. But there are days where I'm feeling really despairing, and I'll run smack into someone like Melissa O'Shaughnessy or Daniel Arnold, and just feel like, oh man, thank God I can just randomly run into one of these people when I'm feeling low, and know that they're going to understand. So that's nice for sure. When I started doing this, I never saw other street photographers ever. So it's good and bad. Mostly good though.
Just got one question, because I wanted to ask this, and we don't always ask all of the questions that we want to, because it just doesn't flow that way, when we're having a conversation. But I do want to ask one thing. You started off in Washington, D.C., and you said you never really thought you'd see yourself leaving Washington, and then you moved to New York in the late 80s. Do you think you would have become a photographer at all if you'd stayed in Washington, or do you think New York opened that door for you?
I mean, I really don't know. It's such a hypothetical. It's impossible to really answer. But I tend to think no, that I probably would not have felt the same urgency to get a camera. And I would say that because my memory of my first days here, which were long, like 20 years before I got interested in photography.
Yeah.
I was having a photographic experience on the streets from the first day. I remember walking up the main drag in my Brooklyn neighborhood on my first day as a New Yorker, and just looking around me and seeing all these little scenes that in my mind I would freeze into little still moments. And I'm not sure where that came from. It could have been from, like, I think that the only reference I can really identify is like when I was a kid, a lot of the popular TV shows and their opening credit sequences would show like people from the show doing things and then suddenly stop. Like there'd be this frozen moment and then they'd show their name, and or their character's name and a credit under it or whatever, and so I can't think of which ones, like maybe SWAT or The Odd Couple or, Barney Miller, all these shows. And so I think of those, I think that was like partially an influence. I would like walk down the street and I'd see these little, what now I call heightened moments. Like people are having an interaction, they're talking, they're gesturing at each other. And then there's a moment where two of them at once go, whoa, and kind of like gesture with their hands. And I would, in my mind, kind of freeze that. And how I didn't like immediately go from that to the idea of wanting a camera, I do not know. But it took, decades for me to go, hey, maybe I could take a picture of that and actually show it to somebody else, But it was happening in my brain, and that was not really happening when I lived in DC. Yeah. Growing up in DC, it felt like you could wait for years to experience a moment that felt that cinematic. And I remember my first year in New York, just constantly telling people back home, it's like being in a movie 24/7. And it still feels like that today, even with all the changes and all the, destruction of so many things that I loved that I came here for, I thought. But somehow that feeling of people really living out life in public and what that brings, and the lack of any kind of bubble and any kind of separation between rich and poor, it's just pointless here. Everybody's just thrown in together in this maniacal soup. So yeah, I don't know. There's something about New York that changed me as a person and felt like I had arrived where I had been meant to be all this time. And that's that was really from day one. I just felt like this is what I've been waiting for my whole life.
I think it's just interesting that you thought you were going to New York for one reason, and it just a whole new door opened up that you never ever imagined, and that's about life, isn't it? And living. You just don't know what it's going to present itself to,
Yeah, I mean, even within music, it opened different doors that I wasn't thinking about, and then you think back and you go, oh, well, I mean, I could have found that door wherever I was, but there's something about being here that just threw me into the path of so many unexpected, uninvited influences. And I mean, I still really love that about it.
Fabulous. So, Reuben, we've come to the end, but we always ask one cliched question before we go. I know. If you've listened to
I suppose you're allowed one.
Coming.
Yeah.
If you could go anywhere in the world to photograph, where would you go and why?
Australia, absolutely. So I got to tell you, when I was a young kid, about 1980, 81, in the DC area where I was growing up, we started getting late night TV. We started getting episodes of this show called Prisoner, which you may know.
Yeah.
Now over here, they renamed it. They called it Cell Block H, but it was Prisoner.
Yep.
And my mother and I were absolutely hooked on Prisoner and watched it religiously. And I became fascinated with Australia, in particular Melbourne, because that's where the show took place, was in a women's prison outside of Melbourne. And I mean, when I was a kid, I could do Australian accents because I was just so absorbed in that show. I can't really do it now, so don't ask me. But I mean, I was really transported by that show. But so I've always retained a certain, I don't know if fascination's the right word, but a certain like soft spot in my heart for it. And yet I've never been there because you're so damn far away. And in my music life, I kept thinking, oh, one of these years somebody's going to invite me, there'll be some occasion for me to get there. And it never happened. So now I'm hoping maybe photography can help with that, because I'd really love to come there. And there's so many interesting photographers there, it seems like, from the internet. I've seen quite a few, and I'm a big Trent Park fan.
Yeah.
And as I'm sure you guys are.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, it's just, I have a lot of reasons to be interested.
Well, you hear that? Australian photography festivals. Invite Reuben out to Australia. So we'd love to see you here one day. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
I can't wait.
Well, Reuben, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And if people want to take your workshops, where do they go and find out where to contact you?
If they can spell my name, they can find me pretty easily. ReubenRadding.com. You can get from my website. You can get to the links to info about the workshops. And if I have any zines or anything to sell, I'm sold out right now. But maybe I don't know when this is going to air. But within a few months, I imagine I'll probably succumb to the urge to do another.
Thank you so much.
Fabulous.
Thanks, guys.